This is Progress Canada. Rob Cerjanec is one of the newest faces at Queen's Park. He's the MPP for Ajax and the Liberal Critic for Economic Development and Innovation, Tourism, Sport, and Culture. Today, Rob shares what it's like to launch a winning campaign, take a seat as an MPP, and start the complex work of building a team, representing his community, and navigating the day-to-day realities of provincial politics.
So I want to go back a few months here now because you ran for provincial office for the first time in an election that was kind of like no other, because we had, a snap election call. We had this psychodrama with America happening at the same time. Let's talk about your campaign and what made it stand out given all the distractions that were going on at the time, and the fact that you got elected as a first-time MPP despite all of that. Can you talk about, how you approach your campaign and what do you think made it stand out and lead to your victory?
Well, I think the one advantage that I had was that politics isn't new to me. So while, it was the first time I was a provincial candidate, it's not the first time that I've run a campaign or been a part of a campaign. I think back to all the campaigns I've worked on. I've pretty much done like every single role, whether it was from data entry to doing comms, doing the strategy, running field organization for a mayoral campaign across 25 ridings. So I had a really good kind of basis and understanding of what needed to get done. Managed to recruit and build a team around me in very short order, which helped. But given that it was the winter, given that it was so short, the team was small. So that was, I think, a little bit different than what you would normally see. The first day I knocked on doors was the first day the writ dropped. So literally that 28th day of the campaign, that's all I had. So while not new to politics, running, I had run for the school board once, before about 10 years ago or so. So being a candidate, isn't unfamiliar for me either, but it's different, right? So now with social media, with videos, with advertising, and all of that, those are the pieces that we worked throughout the campaign. And I remember saying to my team, kind of the day before the election, I think it was, I said, I wish we had another week, because we were building momentum. I think it's a pretty good sign when volunteers in the community are showing up and saying, hey, how can I help? And they were doing that because of maybe what they saw on TV, but we were running social media ads. We were knocking on doors and sometimes out alone, but you had to get out there and do it. So, it was a very unique situation, that's for certain. I think when I did my office opening, it was probably about 2.5 weeks to election day. So the runway was it was incredibly short, right? So it's kind of remarkable to think about, what you are able to accomplish in a short amount of time. And, there were other factors at play as well. I'm happy to dive into some of those.
Have you, compared notes with any of your fellow Liberal MPPs who were also first timers this time out? I know a couple of them had run provincially in the previous campaign too, but was there some kind of uniqueness to all of your campaigns or similarities between all your campaigns that you've sort of talked about since then?
I think part of it was probably social media ads. I think that is something where there's definitely some similarities there, but everyone's situation was different, right? So Lee Fairclough, she's my seatmate. She was the only other Liberal to knock out a PC incumbent, but she was the candidate in the election before and had a lot of runway. So the situations I would say were, I think, pretty unique between, I think, all of us, the 5 that were new. Tyler Watt as well, right? He was a past candidate and had been doing that work on the ground for the last 2.5 years before. And, my friend John Sow, I've known John Sow for a very long time in Don Valley North. It's actually the area in which I grew up in, believe it or not. And, I think his campaign was unique as well, where, the incumbent was an independent and was running. So I think every situation was different, but I think it all came back to, frankly, knocking on doors at the end of the day and really being relentless and being out there and doing that kind of work.
the sense I get from each of you as individuals, and I know some of you, I think I've met almost all of you at this point, but the sense I get was that you ran really local and candidate focused campaigns. And, even some of the campaigns I saw that lost had done something similar and they came very close. How important was that for you to run as Rob, the local champion who knows about the issues in this community of Ajax?
So that's exactly what we did. And I had worked for the public school board in Durham region before, so I had a good sense and understanding of kind of the broader issues. But as the campaign went on, I really wanted to make sure that we were talking local and talking, about local issues and coming up with ideas and suggestions around there. So we were, I came up with like 5-point plan for Ajax, and that was based on feedback and responsiveness from the community, quite frankly. So it was the Express Go train, for example. That's a really good example where the Express Go train hasn't existed for many years now in Durham region, going back to the pandemic. So we really, we were at the Go station, we were talking to people outside, and that was something that was resonating quite well with people. And now the work, begins and continues, where now we've got to push the government to get that Express Go train to come sooner. But issues like the Greenbelt, for example, the Greenbelt was a really big issue. So, talking about that in the community. And I think that was something where there was some cracks, right? And this government had. So that's just another example of what was happening. And locally, the hospital was a really big issue. Really challenging, I think, reputation in the community the hospital has, because it's and it's not the workers' fault, right? They are doing what they can and working really hard around that. But that was another issue, absolutely.
So I've had a few folks on here. I actually just talked to Kathleen Wynne the other day. That episode will air after yours because of the way I'm doing the chronology. But what seems constant from some of the politicians I've talked to is the importance of going to the door. I'm wondering if you can talk about anything that came up at the door on the campaign trail that maybe you didn't expect or know about until actually doing that face-to-face work.
Surprisingly, the issue that came up the most, and it's not a provincial issue necessarily, was property taxes, believe it or not. So Ajax is a suburban riding, right? It's 85% homeowners. And property taxes was something that came up quite a bit. And, that's decisions are made at the municipal level, absolutely. But at the same time, it does speak to the role that the province can and probably should be playing when it comes to our municipalities. So if we think back, 30 years to the Harris government, they downloaded quite a bit of services, social services, essentially wealth redistribution programs to municipalities. So that's something that now municipalities are struggling with. And that adds upward pressure to the property tax burden that folks in those homes are paying. So as part of my plan, I actually spoke about property taxes, and that my belief, and it wasn't party policy necessarily, but my belief is that the province should be doing more to support municipalities. And I'll give you a good example. Locally, there's a Ajax downtown. The town is trying to revitalize the downtown to try and attract growth, to attract investment, but there's infrastructure upgrades and improvements that need to take place. So as part of that, they applied for funding, and were actually encouraged to by the province to apply for funding to essentially extend the street, do some of the development, enabling infrastructure works, and they weren't approved. So it turned into a local issue that when I was talking about property taxes, I'd actually have a tangible thing that I could point to in the community that either now the town is either going to have to fund for it itself, or it's just not going to happen.
Right. So I want to pivot now to, post-campaign. You won.
Yeah.
Excellent. Congratulations. There's a bit of a process once you win before you become an MPP. You have to be sworn into office. This is something that happens. You get to bring your supporters, your family. It's a very nice little ceremony that you get to have. Then eventually the House returns and you get to take your seat for the first time, which is always a fun thing. And then you get into the normal procedures of the day. So, question period, committees, all that kind of stuff. What was that process like for you? And was there anything surprising in it? You've been around politics, but it's very different when you're the person doing it.
So I've been an Ontario Liberal for probably more than 15 years and like actively involved within the party, right? At the local level, serving on riding associations, attending AGMs, having those conversations. But when we were in government, I didn't work at Queen's Park. I had multiple opportunities to come and work at Queen's Park, and I had said no because I liked the job that I was doing so much. I was working at Toronto City Hall. I was working on housing issues, and I just liked the work that I was doing, so I didn't want to go to Queen's Park. So now being a new MPP, I'm like, I'm not sure how this building works. Now, I've been here for, the house has, I guess, been sitting now for the last month and a half. So in this month and a half, I have a really good sense of it now, of how generally things work. But I'm going to share a funny story. It was the day of the throne speech, because the first day you elect the speaker, and that's it. So literally, you all assemble as MPPs. You're sitting in the chamber, you elect the speaker, and then you're kind of done for the day, right? In terms of what your legislative responsibilities are. The next day you go and sit and listen to the speech from the throne, which is the government's agenda, of course. And, again, it's new, right? It's a new environment for me. I know a lot of our Liberal MPPs, but I know NDP MPPs as well. I know Conservative MPPs, just based on my involvement in politics for many years. And then other people that, you've been introduced to, or that you kind of know of each other, but you don't know each other. So it was a great opportunity, I think, during those times and after as well, to have those conversations and either reconnect people or meet new people. But we do the speech from the throne, and I don't think I'd actually been in the opposition lobby before. So for our viewers at home, there are these kind of lobbies that are only for MPPs and select staff who are supporting MPPs to go into, and there's coffee and some pastries there, and some couches,
right.
and so on. So I'm like, I've never been in it before. So I just go and wander into there and, talking with an NDP MPP, both new MPPs. And we're like, there's coffee here. This is interesting. And there's these paper cups. So I grab it, I put coffee, make my coffee, put it in the paper cup. And I'm now just kind of wandering, right? I'm literally just, I'm seeing there's media scrums taking place. So I leave the opposition lobby, and I'm like, there's the leader. She's getting scrummed by media. The caucus is standing behind her. So now I'm like, maybe I should go stand behind them, right? So I'm like walking around my coffee, like it felt like an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm or Seinfeld, where now I've got like a coffee and a paper cup. Imagine me walking around with it, and I'm standing behind John Fraser because the leader's being scrummed, and I'm like, I really hope in my head John doesn't move back, because I've got a full hot coffee in my hand, right, and it's going to end up on his pants. So, and then just kind of, it really felt like an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, and like in my head, I'm like hearing background music. It was hilarious.
I know the exact music you're talking about. Yeah. For copyright reasons, we won't add it in here.
Yes, we won't.
I want to talk about that opposition lobby, because you were just talking about, you've only gone through the government side, and I was thinking about it. I was like, I've never been on the opposition side either. I've only been, briefing various ministers I've worked for on the other side. I did go in as a guest a couple times into the gallery and all that kind of stuff. But what's it like to be on the opposition side of that lobby, where there are people from other parties milling about as you're milling about? Like, it must lend itself to some cooperation from the opposition.
I think people develop relationships over time, right? So sometimes you're talking about what's going on in the chamber, but sometimes you're talking about your riding, or just sometimes you're talking about personal life, right? So, I can say, especially among, so we have an independent MPP, Bobby Ann Brady. So she gets to use that side as well. So I've had the opportunity to have some wonderful conversations with her, and just getting to know each other a little bit better. I can tell you that we have a Green MPP in Lee Fairclough, which is a Liberal one. So Green, Ashland Clancy, and Lee Fairclough, that have collaborated and have put together a bill saying that we need a 10-year homelessness plan. So I think there are some of those opportunities for collaboration. I think what you're seeing in the House is that as Liberals, at least I'm feeling it, we're both getting attacked from the government side and also from the NDP. Maybe that means we're doing the right things. Maybe they see us as a threat. I don't know. So I do find that's a little interesting. And there'll be times where we get up and yeah, absolutely, we'll agree with some of the things the NDP is saying, and we'll agree sometimes with some of the things the government's saying. I can speak for myself, and I can't speak on behalf of Lee, but we do have, I think, some of a similar mentality as it comes to approaching this kind of work, because we're both new. And I ran to get stuff done. I didn't run to just say, look at me, I'm important or special, or, just to oppose, right? So when there's things that I think can add to the debate, I want to do that. And where there's things that I think that maybe, it isn't going well or it isn't good, I'll say that as well. That's the approach that I'm trying to take as a new MPP. Maybe ask me in a year how I feel about that. But right now, right? You know what? I went into this the eyes wide open, right? Like,
yeah.
Although I never worked at Queen's Park before, I've never been elected before per se, I have seen the machinery of government, right? I have, I do understand what that is. And frankly, the reality here is that a very small number of people actually kind of set the agenda and control what happens. And that's really driven by the Premier's office, right? And maybe the Principal Secretary, maybe the Chief of Staff, just as it's the same federally. And just as the same at a municipal level as well. If you're in a big municipality like I worked in Toronto, that agenda really is set from the center and from the top. So like there's opportunities to tweak, there's opportunities to maybe make some improvements. But the overall agenda is really a very small number of people deciding what happens.
So I really like that framing, because I've been thinking about, of course, there was a federal election after your election, and the official opposition at the federal level under Pierre Poilievre had really talked about, well, we're the opposition, so we need to oppose.
Yeah.
I think they will probably mostly keep that frame going forward, but they have softened a little bit and thought, well, we can collaborate on some things as well. And that really brings back the point of being a political representative, which is you represent your local community above all else. You have your party stripe, but ultimately you are elected by people in your community, and you need to represent, the things that they're looking for out of government. So can you talk a little bit about what it looks like to do that work, both, in the community, but also at Queen's Park, and what it looks like building that team to help you do that, of course, because you're the MPP, but you're supported by staff in your constituency and also at Queen's Park. What's it look like to put together that team, set up your office and manage constituent needs as you're, trying to learn all this parliamentary procedure on the other side?
100%. It's interesting because during the campaign, and somebody, part of the reason I think I resonated well is that I got back to people and that I engaged with people. And somebody asked me a question on a big Facebook kind of group where a lot of people are on it and engaging and talking about kind of politics within Ajax. Is they asked me, if you're there, who are you going to be loyal to or be accountable to or respond to? The party and the leader, or Ajax? And my answer was very simple. It's Ajax at the end of the day. My job is to bring forward their thoughts, their needs, their concerns, their hopes, their dreams to the legislature. So whether that's issue by issue basis or whether that's more the broader kind of agenda or approach, that's what I always need to bring things back to. So in terms of setting up the office, I mean, you get elected, and the day after the election, you get a phone call. And they say, is this you? And can you give us your emails so we can send you something so that you can get onto the portal as a new MPP and start to think about and understand these things. So, the legislature goes through training, right? They'll train all the new MPPs and explain, here's how your office budget works, right? Here's the maximum amount you have. Here's what you need to do when you're signing leases for constituency offices. So they do go through some of that with us, in addition to how does the chamber work, right? How does debate work? Which, now I think, I have a better idea of. So in terms of setting up that office, in some ways, I got a little lucky. Because we had a federal election and Mark Holland, who was the member of parliament in Ajax, chose not to run again. He'd been in politics for a very long time. Time for him, it felt something to do something new. So I managed to hire 2 of his staff to work in my office. So now these are folks that already know the community, that have already worked in the community. They've done events, they've helped constituent, they know some of the important community groups and organizations, and have a good pulse of things. So 2 of them I managed to take from Mark's office. So that I think is working out very well so far. And I'm very lucky to be able to have folks that have experienced working in politics before. But I also, I posted the job as well, and still kind of in the process of hiring, looking at summer students right now. Might need to make a couple more decisions as we move on. But you technically get elected. It's the day of the election. It's like the day after. So you get paid from like the day after the election, and you technically like assume office on the election date, which is fascinating. And I didn't really realize that's how it works. You're the member-elect, and you're getting paid as a member and needing to set up and do all of those different things. So it really, you've kind of got to do it right away. And that was a bit of a challenge, because now you're getting constituents contacting you right away. So for a bit, it's also like, okay, folks, hey, we don't have staff yet. We're just trying to get set up, right? So you're not trying to run interference, but at the same time, you're just saying, hey, please be patient, right? And a lot of, I do think probably my sense of it is, and I never worked in a federal MP's office, but I do sense that they have a little bit more of a pressure sometimes around time sensitivity, because they're dealing with immigration applications, right? So people will go to their member of parliament's office and ask for help around an immigration application and following it up and trying to move it forward. Provincially, it isn't, as dire in a lot of cases. There might be some situations where absolutely it is. And it's not like municipal as well, where it's something really, the garbage isn't being picked up, right? Or something in their neighborhood. So, asking people for some grace and some time, and I think being open and transparent with people, but it's been a journey so far. But it's like you're starting up a small business. Like that's what you're doing, right? You're hiring staff. Yep.
Getting office space, like how many real estate deals do you do in like a week?
Well, exactly, right?
The usual approach.
So it's looking, do I want to keep the current office? Do I want a new office, right? You're ordering office supplies, right? You're trying to set up templates and processes. So it really is kind of like starting a small business.
And there's, different things you have to do too. Like you have to meet AODA requirements in terms of the space itself. There are security concerns in some offices. Like I know offices where, there's a button under the desk to lock doors and stuff like that, depending on what the reality of that office is. Can you talk a little bit about, if I'm a constituent in Ajax, what can I go to you to help? What is provincial jurisdiction? What can your constituency team help me with?
So it's anything that kind of is a service that's offered by the government of Ontario. So it could even be helping with people access their kind of photo ID cards, right? Maybe they're having trouble with it, or it's just pointing them in the right direction. Things like accessible parking permits, or if someone's struggling with accessing ODSP, for example, Ontario Disability Support Program. So like anything that kind of has to directly do with the provincial government, that's where, as an MPP, we have more influence over, right? Because, we're able to kind of contact those ministries, and whether it's in a minister's office or whether it's, separate, we have a lot more influence there. When people will come to us, though, about federal issues, so we have a new federal MP. So right now we're telling, hey, please be patient, because now she's setting up her office. But I'll give you an example. There was a tragic accident that occurred, and 2 people passed away, and somebody contacted me and said, hey, can you just help, right? Can you help figure out how to get them here? So I said, okay, well, let me see what I can rely on with my network. So we have, one of my staff has a good connection with another MP's office, and it's immigration. They need essentially emergency visa to come here to attend a funeral. So we said, well, let's see what we can do. So we managed to help get them that in very short order in a very tragic and sad situation. just to provide a bit of comfort for the family. So depending on what the situation is, right, we are able to still help and advance things. So that's part of it. And because the MP was still sitting up her office, we're like, well, let's not try and, add one more thing to their plate. Let's just try and solve it and get it done for them. So we're able to do that. For example, and I believe really of the importance of, if it has to do with the other level, we shouldn't just say, here's the phone number and that's it. But we should actually make that direct connection and follow up as well, because if I'm saying I'm here to help, I mean that. And that's what the office then needs to be doing as well.
I really like that approach, because I think people in politics forget, like, you are a customer service agent ultimately, right? I'm somebody who worked, over a decade in retail, so I understand this at a very deep level. But also, in my own political experience, instead of going straight to a ministry, I went to an MPP's office because I wanted to understand the constituency side, the legislative side. We had the ministry side. Like, I wanted to understand the entire process of politics. And something you just brought up, which is, your constit has to reach out to ministries about various programs, because again, you're technically sort of acting on behalf of the government, but you aren't the government.
No.
And those relationships are essential to getting work done. And I think people, think about the cut and thrust in the legislature and the debate and all that stuff. But there are so many people working throughout this entire, ecosystem of politics that have to build those relationships. And I think, should you ever be on the government side, and hopefully you will be, it's something to remind your staff as well, who maybe haven't been at the constit level, that, like, those relationships matter. You have to get back to offices. Bingo. And it's extremely important. Yeah. And
that's what I'm trying to do. So, I have to remind people in the community as well that, I am an opposition MPP, right? Mm-hmm. So my level of influence with the government sometimes is going to be a little bit different than if I'm a government MPP. But I'm very intentional in my approach, because I came here to get stuff done. I didn't come here just to say, look at me, I'm important, or just want to oppose things, right? So I'm pretty aware of that. So I'm building relationships with ministers. I'm building relationships, right, across the legislature. So yeah, you see the debate and question period, and frankly, there's a reason, I guess, why it's called question period and not answer period, because you don't really get many answers. Maybe that was different under previous governments. I don't know. But right now, there isn't much of that. So that's kind of that drama and stuff. And I actually mentioned in my inaugural speech, I don't really think, that kind of piece is very productive to the work that we're doing. And even like kind of, you see the press conferences sometimes, like, it's important to get the message out through a press conference. I understand that. But it's the conversations in the hallways, right? It's the conversations on the way into the legislature or out of it. Right. And I have to say, I've made some good relationships with some of the ministers in this government, because you don't know when, you might need to actually say, hey, we need some help on an issue. But I've even had some ministers, and this is, again, what the public doesn't see. Some ministers have said, look, if there is something, here's my number, just contact me, and we'll try and help people. Because I think most of the people in that chamber, I can't speak for all of them, but I think most of the people in there, you're on different sides, but at the end of the day, people did run to improve their communities and try and make life better. Maybe it's a different direction and has unintended consequences for other groups of people, as I think we're seeing right now with Bill 5, for example, which would create these special economic zones and give the government whatever power they want to do in whatever area of the province that they determine, and override all provincial laws. And I don't know if you can hear it right now, but there's actually people in front of the legislature right now protesting, Indigenous groups talking about Bill 5, because my office fronts onto the front of the legislature. So my view is of that front where you see those protests take place. So I hear it as well.
So that's an excellent reminder to people who want to get, push the government to do things, is show up on the lawn, because they can hear you. I do remember that, like, there have been protests in the past where question period is going on in the House, and you can literally hear outside on the lawn. I want to, this was actually going into my next area I wanted to talk about, which was, balancing competing needs at the local level and the provincial level. You have your party agenda, you have your local agenda, you have your personal agenda too. I think people forget that a politician has to balance a lot of different things, including their own views on things. But I really want to dig into, there's a lot of legislation going on right now that I think is harmful. Yeah. But the biggest piece is Bill 5, and you had just mentioned it. So it's technically called the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, which is very euphemistic in my mind. But ultimately, it does do what you just said, which is it removes all laws in any place that it is applied to. So can you talk about that? Can you also talk about, joining in on the pushback in committee with your, fellow MPs, but also, the liberal brat pack, if you will, the four of you guys going in and speaking out about this. Can you talk about that process? Because I think the committee process is something people don't have a lot of sightline into.
Mm-hmm. And then the committee process is still something that's a little new to me. So last week on Wednesday, Bill 5 was at committee. And they will, committee, when they're looking at a bill, there's kind of two different things that happen. There's a day or two or an amount of time that's scheduled for groups to make presentations. And those are likely very interested groups. So in the case of Bill 5, there's a lot of Indigenous groups, for example, that are there, organized labor, others as well. I'm on a different committee than that one. So we had a lot of people presenting about the free trade bill within Canada. So a whole bunch of groups will make their presentations, and it's on the record, right? It's recorded, it's live streamed online, anybody can watch it. And there's minutes taken after as well of what was said. So all of that is there. And then there's another part that then they'll, consider amendments to the bill. So, opposition MPPs can move, any member of the committee can move amendments to the bill. So how that works is that, you move it, say, I want to change a schedule or this line, and you'll work with legislative. There's actually lawyers on staff to help work with you to make those amendments, because when you look at kind of a bill, an act, even it's a little confusing, because it's like, this is very legalese language. It's very specific. It doesn't really even refer to, everything there. There's an explanatory note, which I think helps in the understanding of what the intention is, which I think is very good. But now on Bill 5, because there's been so much pushback and frankly, so many issues, because the government didn't go out and consult before, they didn't really lay the groundwork for it. They've introduced, I think, what is 25 amendments to their own bill, which is kind of unheard of. Very rarely do you ever see a government introduce so many amendments to their own piece of legislation that when they introduced it said, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and this is going to fix all of the problems. What it actually does is it kind of gives kind of king-like decree powers to the premier and to ministers to do whatever the heck they want. And in that bill, they even mentioned a landfill site, a dump in Dresden that has not been active for many years. And we know landfills, garbage stinks. Well, the bill kind of stinks as well, right? They mentioned Ontario Place as a special economic zone in there as well, which is, this government's under a lot of fire around the Thermate deal, for example. And now you're hearing the premier say, well, I'm going to designate the 401 tunnel a special economic zone. And it literally gives the government the ability to do whatever they want. Like, any law in Ontario doesn't have to apply anymore. Could be health and safety laws even, who knows? It's kind of unprecedented to give a government or ministers this amount of power. And to be honest, it's to their negative, it's not to their benefit to have those powers, because they're going to screw it up. Bad things are going to happen, and they're going to be creating more issues for themselves. So that's up to them at the end of the day. But at committee last week, I finished debating a motion in the legislature, and it's sit at the chamber, finished sitting for the day. So I go over to committee and I just say to Ted, hey, how can I help? And John Fraser was there as well. And Tyler Watt joined us, MPP Watt, he's in Nepean. And we came up, we said, okay, well, we have a plan, we have a strategy that, we want to be able to talk about these amendments actually that are coming up, but we don't want to do that under the cover of darkness overnight. So the government had moved a motion saying that we want to meet overnight. So we want to meet from 12:01 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning. And we always know, right, the best things happen overnight, right? No, they don't. Some of the worst things sometimes can happen overnight, especially when you're a government, right? And you're debating or talking about these kinds of things. So Ted Hsu was very on the ball and kind of leading the maneuvering at the committee level. And he introduced an amendment there saying, well, no, we should meet from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. tomorrow. So we're actually saying to the government, hey, look, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Let's go through those amendments tomorrow, because you also want to try and get this bill passed. Okay, we don't want you to pass it. We want you to pull the bill. But at the same time, I think you have a responsibility to do things properly and, frankly, during the daylight, not under the cover of darkness. So we moved that. So then I'm there. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be talking on this. So I actually found out kind of on the fly exactly how that kind of committee procedure works. And you can speak for 20 minutes. And if somebody else speaks, you can speak again for 20 minutes. So I'm like, okay. Now, it's interesting because you're talking about Bill 5, but you have to speak to the motion that's on the floor. Well, the motion is to say, don't meet overnight, but meet tomorrow. So I never thought as an MPP, quite frankly, that I would be there in committee and be talking for 20 minutes on the issue of time and why it's a bad idea to do this overnight instead of doing it tomorrow. And other people were talking, and the chair would interrupt, or the government member that was kind of leading the committee effort would interrupt and do a point of order and say, I'd like to remind the member they need to speak to the motion. So the only time that happened when I spoke was because some of the government members were chirping. They're like, yeah, let's do it now. And I'm like, yeah, well, we should be able to do it now. So I'm responding to what they're saying and chirping. And then they were like, oh, you got to speak to them. I'm like, well, I'm happy to, but they want to all talk. And frankly, they were giving me more ammunition to say that their bill is crappy, because it is. So never thought I'd be doing that. But yeah, so I was there. Ted was there. And then Ted spoke about sleep deprivation. Tyler spoke about, how in nursing, for example, you need to be rested, right? And we're saying, look, let's meet, let's discuss the amendments. We can even do that tonight until midnight. But the government was so stubborn, and I don't really know why. And maybe they're just trying to now, use that, and that there isn't enough time to get it through by the end, because now they're trying to move time allocation on it at committee. And if things aren't even passed, it's just going to go as passed back to the House and really rush a process that there's a lot of issues with the bill. So Ted moved a bunch of amendments to it, saying, well, look, even if they're going to try and ram it through, here's at least some things that make it better, like protecting our water supply, the Clean Water Act, for example, because Walkerton happened many years ago now. And frankly, we don't want another Walkerton or another issue related to, frankly, water, which we need for life.
It seems to be this government's approach to things, where they did it with the election too. They rushed the election so that people didn't really have much time to think about it. Then they have rushed this legislation, and if passed, it would rush past approvals and any kind of rules just so they can do whatever they want. At every stage, what that ultimately comes back down to is a lack of oversight, not just from you as fellow MPPs, but of local residents. And you brought up Dresden, and that's an example of, a community pushing back and saying, actually, this doesn't work for us. But what this legislation would do is apply that to any community it wants.
Absolutely. And I feel bad for the local MPP there, and he's a conservative MPP. Because he ran in a by-election wasn't too long ago, and made a commitment that this isn't going to happen, and that they're going to follow environmental processes. And then this is happening, and he's actually spoken out against it. And I haven't noticed him in the legislature the last bit as well. I don't know if it's related or not. I have no idea. But I kind of feel bad because he ran in his community, and now he's getting shafted by his own government. Like he is, the MPP is. And now he's saying, well, if they do push it through, I'll do whatever it can to make sure they follow the process as much as possible. But what we're seeing here, honestly, is that the government, and I'm seeing it on their side in the benches, and even at committee, very arrogant, right? It's very just, we got another majority, so we're just going to push everything through. And we saw with the Greenbelt, right? We saw with a whole bunch of other issues that they do these things, and they have to walk it back after, instead of, taking the time and considering it. Our parliamentary leader, John Fraser, said every time this government rushes, something bad happens. And I think that's going to be the case here if they push through Bill 5. And they're awakening, I would say, I think, a spirit among Indigenous communities in this province that are saying, this isn't the way. This is the old approach that you're taking. Even though you try and say it's, that you respect Indigenous rights, it's not actually being shown. And there are Indigenous communities and leaders that are saying, yeah, we want responsible resource development in the North. I think there are MPPs of all parties that are saying, absolutely, mining projects should not take 15 years. But we also can't override basic rights when we're doing that. You can do things in a much smarter way while respecting Indigenous rights, while respecting treaty rights, and frankly, while respecting the environment as well. It can be done. A one project, one process kind of approach. I think there's probably unanimous agreement in the House on that, is my sense of it. But I think it's just the approach that's being taken and really the lack of consultation. And I even saw that on the free trade bill at committee, where different groups, and we would ask them, you have the opportunity to ask these experts, were you consulted before? And some will say yes, some will say no. But it's pretty clear that level of groundwork, especially on something as big and significant as creating a special economic zone wherever you want to do whatever you want, they didn't do that. And now, if they do push it through, we'll see. Hopefully not. Hopefully they rescind it. We're going to do whatever we can in the legislature to still fight them on that. But if they do, I think they're just going to be creating more issues for them. And frankly, it'll just spell a shorter shelf life for this government, which, I'd like to beat them on, other merits, not just, them trampling people's rights, quite frankly.
Right. And I think, the other part of this is, even should they pass it, again, they have a majority, so that seems likely. Should they pass it, they then have to live with the fallout of bringing this to various communities and getting, social pushback, if not legislative. And this is something for folks to remember, is that just because a bill passes doesn't mean you have to take your foot off the gas and pushing back against the government. Because ultimately, legislation can be rewritten again. And I think that's, important for people to remember, if this is a bill that is a bit of a fait accompli.
And what you're hearing is, from Indigenous leaders and groups, is the words, I will know more. And if there's something that scares big corporations, it is conflict around projects and legal processes and blockades and other things. And they could even, if they do manage to push this bill through, I think they're going to have some challenges in businesses coming forward, especially around the North and around mining, and that because those projects are then going to become targets because this government is not respecting Indigenous rights at the end of the day. And that means that, the resource development that I think everyone agrees that needs to happen in some way, shape, or form, including Indigenous groups, projects mired in legal battles and blockades and other things, and God knows what else could happen, heaven forbid, worse things. That's not good for business. That's not good for investment. And that's not good for, frankly, a good economic or even a social climate as well.
This is very much the get it done Ford slogan, which is, not often the most strategic or effective approach when you think about all the things that come up. Before we go, I want to talk about your agenda for Ajax. Two things. One, is there any pieces of legislation that are on your mind that you might want to put forward as your first PMB? And the second part is, can you talk about some of what you've actually achieved already, which, maybe you want to talk about Highway 401 East or 407 East a bit.
407. So interesting on Highway 407 East. And this is a promise that, the government made during the election campaign, that they'll take the tolls off Highway 407. But we've seen with governments make a lot of promises. And sometimes those promises don't always get delivered right away. Sometimes they take times where they don't happen at all. So after the election, I wrote to the minister. I even mentioned it to the minister in the House as well, the Minister of Transportation, to say, don't delay, do it now, right? You folks made a commitment. People are hurting. People are looking for relief. So my message to them, and I did a petition and in the community as well, was don't delay, do it now, because the government could actually just change it via regulation by making the tolls zero. So that was my message, and we ran a campaign around that, and brought people together in the community, and also showed, I think, that people are paying attention, and that things that I think more broadly benefit everyone, that more broadly I think most people are on board with, move ahead and do it, and don't delay. So that was something that we were, I think, pretty successful in. Maybe they'll say we were going to do it anyways. I don't know. But if you don't put that pressure on at the end of the day, you never know. Things do fall. And we've seen this of governments of all stripes. A lot of promises are made. Sometimes they don't get delivered on. Locally as well, something that's really important, and I think it's going to be more than just important for my riding in Ajax, but all of Durham region, is GO electrification. So electrifying the GO transit corridor. So you heard me earlier talk about bringing back the Express GO service. I'm going to be doing a lot of work around that. But in a broader sense, we need to ensure that that Lakeshore East corridor and all the GO corridors are electrified. And what that means is that you can run more trains faster. So you can have a shorter headway between trains because they can start faster from stations and they can stop faster into stations. And this is something that under the previous Liberal government, a lot of work was being done to advance and set the groundwork for that electrification. Now been 7 years, and it doesn't really feel like or seem like we're further ahead. And we just saw recently the government had a big contract with Deutsche Bahn, which is the rail provider in Germany, and other organizations as well that know how to do high-speed rail or that know how to do frequent rail and electrified rail. And that contract's been canceled. They're not part of it anymore. So I think there are really real concerns about that. And if we want to talk about getting more cars off the road, we've got to make transit easy and efficient for people to be able to take it. I'll be advocating. So that's just one kind of, I think, a bigger picture thing that is on the mind of a lot of people. And I can tell you every single GO rider cares about this. And it's going to be to this government's detriment if they don't actually get electrification going soon, because they like to talk about a lot of projects that they're starting or doing. They're really bad at finishing projects. It's quite astonishing how bad this government is at finishing projects. So we do need to keep that pressure on. And that means Conservative MPPs feeling that pressure as well, just like around Bill 5. The more people that contact their Conservative MPP, the more likely they walk something back or make those kinds of changes. Locally, as well, is really defending the Greenbelt and the environment. It's something that's really important to Ajax. And in the downtown area, we do have a homeless challenge. There are some shelters in Durham region. It's kind of Oshawa has the most amount of folks who are homeless, but Ajax is behind that. And it's something that's a challenge within the community. And although I'm an opposition MPP, what I'm going to hope to try and be able to do is, even if we can find some small solutions, working with providers, working with the community, and bringing people together can we get some supportive housing in place? Because the solution to homelessness is not another shelter; it's a home at the end of the day. And that's what we really need to see that focus on. So that's some of the local issues that I'm working on already and bringing forward. Healthcare is another big one as well with the hospital. And we'll be doing a lot of work around that in an area of Ajax that needs a new school as well. In terms of private members' bills, I'm still thinking about that a little bit. My ballot date's in September, so I do need to get on introducing at least one thing. I think ideally, I'd like to bring forward something that has a chance of passing, not just trying to use it to say this is what I'm advocating for or fighting for. I would like to be able to make some sort of difference or change that way. So I'm the Ontario Liberal Critic for Economic Development and Innovation, and also Tourism, Culture, and Sport. So I'm thinking about maybe something that talks about entrepreneurship in our province. So that's one of the ideas that I have, whether that's within the school system or elsewhere, but most likely I think within the school system. So that's one of the ideas that I have. There's some stuff around sport as well that some organizations are interested in working on, especially around when it comes to diversity in sport and processes and stuff, and frankly a level playing field for people. There's other there's other ideas as well around kind of fitness and activity and tax credits. So working on those pieces right now. We'll see what I put forward. I can introduce more than one bill. It's just only one bill can be heard in the legislature. So, we know in the past, actually, with private members' bills, sometimes they may not become law right away, but they elevate a very important issue, for example, and it is something that sometimes governments do pull from in the future. I don't think anybody has a monopoly on a good idea, and whatever we can bring forward, whatever I can bring forward with the team, ideally, I want to hopefully have something that can pass, but at least even then to really, I think, advance issues in a way that's meaningful and impactful for the future, because you never know what's going to happen in 4 years.
So we've just got a couple minutes left here, and
Sure.
I always want to leave the last question about, what can, your average Canadian do to help make their community stronger? You're an advocate turned MPP.
Yep.
What's your advice to people who want to advance, social good and improvements in their communities?
Engage, talk to people, talk to your neighbors, and don't be afraid of talking to your elected MPP or MP or councillor or school board trustee or whatever it might be. Sometimes the response you're going to get is going to surprise you in a good way. Someone came to me talking about the issue of rights for common law spouses, and it's something that, hey, you know what, it's a good idea. Let's see what we can do on it. Someone else has come around marriage offices as well. So, those are just two examples. But don't be afraid to talk to your MPP. Don't be afraid to follow up. I would say do it respectfully. Do it well-intentioned, right? Because I think that kind of respect is also important. And it is a two-way street. Sometimes political offices are a little busy. Sometimes it may take a little long to get back to you or not. But if one of your constituents wants to meet you for coffee, have a coffee with them or have a phone call. I think those things are really important. That's something that I'm trying to do. We're going to be doing a coffee event, actually, where anyone can come in and be able to meet. But don't be afraid to engage and be persistent, but do it in a way that's respectful.
Well, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was great.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian communications company specializing in content creation, narrative development, and strategic communications. Our music was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.